Morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes? We're going to start in like, 1 minute or two. Just waiting for everyone to come in. For those who are just outside, they can hear my voice. Good morning, Ademide. I can see you on Zoom with us. Should I start? I guess I should start now. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for all being here. My name is Dr. Vincent. I became director of IFRA-Nigeria, and I won't bore you too much. My life details, I promise it's not very interesting. I'm a historian of Nigeria. I worked on the history of Borno for my PhD. And I used to come to Ibadan, to IFRA-Nigeria, and to UI as a researcher. And I know how important UI is for everyone in Nigeria and West Africa and beyond. That's why I was very proud to become director of IFRA-Nigeria in January of this year. Obviously, it has been the work of all my predecessors and my colleagues, Dr. Senayon being with me as well today. But also, I'd like to mention the names of like Dr. Apard, who also was very important in the way she structured IFRA. Today, we're together to talk about digital humanities. And let me just, talk very quickly then why we think that's an important subject. I told you I'm a historian, but I'm well aware that actually digital humanities are reshaping all the research, whether we are linguists, political scientists, geographers, and the list could be long, and even historians. It's changing the way we have a look at our materials, our sources, our documents, changing the way we write, changing the way we disseminate knowledge in general, and even we produce knowledge. So as you can tell, my idea today, and just my idea, it was also Dr. Mangro Martino's idea, but our idea was to talk about the way we can actually think about knowledge production, to think about the way as a university we can change the way we do research and we disseminate our research. So as you can tell, our idea was to really understand how we can discuss this together, especially in a context where digital humanities are often seen as a tool of privileged universities. These universities being mainly located in Western countries. Our idea basically was to say that digital humanities are not just a tool for rich universities, they also can be done in a very efficient way in everywhere in the world. But still, we want to ask questions. Are we just reproducing inequalities which existed before between, say, Britain, the US, and Nigeria? Are we just, entrenching these differences again with digital humanities, or can we find a way to decolonize knowledge, to make it more available, less Eurocentric, or more Afrocentric in Ibadan and in the Institute of African Studies. So that's why actually I'm very pleased to be here today after this very short introduction of a conference to be hosted by the Institute of African Studies, which was a pioneer in the decolonization of knowledge in general, founded in 1962, like in FDK. And that's why I'm very pleased as well to be part, to work at the University of Ibadan here. As I said before, I wasn't on my own. The director of the Institute of African Studies, the acting director of the Institute of African Studies was part of a scientific committee, Dr. Senayon, Olaoluwa, who's not with us today, but will be represented by Dr. Rutayo, who's with us. He's going to say a few words in a second. Was also part of a scientific committee, Dr. Ademide, who's with us, is going to be pioneering Dr. Ademide Adelusi-Adeluyi, who's going to be a moderator of one of our panels. She's with us on Zoom today, and I would like to say thank you to her since she's in the US and it's not at all the same time there for her, so thank you. And finally, thank you to the last basically member of our scientific committee, Dr. Cyril Mango-Martino, who's with us today, so thank you. I would like now to hand on the microphone to Dr. Rutayo. Where is she? I've lost her. Is she with us now? Has she escaped? Oh, yes, she is. Please, she's coming. Please.
Good morning, sirs and ma'ams. Okay, of the OIP, Professor Aremu. Okay, my boss is in here, Professor Layiwola, and other colleagues and participants. I'm standing in for my director, who is unavoidable absent, and I read his speech thus. I am indeed delighted to welcome you all to this unique celebration of a unique anniversary. The Institut Français de Recherche on Africa, IFRA, was founded 31 years ago in 1990. But today and tomorrow, we are all celebrating its 30th anniversary. The clear one-year deficit should not be a point of oddity, but of uniqueness. It is part of the protocols to be duly observed in the era of COVID-19. Indeed, it is a global best practice. For instance, it chimes in with the idea of celebrating the 2020 Olympic Games in the year 2021. In any case, so let me inform our audience that IFRA-Nigeria is 30 years old today, and we turn 31 old tomorrow. Such are the normalities of these unique times. We celebrate with IFRA because we are involved with IFRA. And this is not just by dint of the fact that their offices are located within the complex of the Institute of African Studies, University of Ibadan. Our relationship with IFRA can be classified as an alliance in the very sense in which the French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss explicated the alliance theorem of marriage, where the institution is seen to exist on the horizontal plane of partnership and networking in order to yield reciprocal exchanges between the parties involved. Our engagement with IFRA has been on this plane of reciprocity over the past 3 decades. Clearly, it has been a fruitful relationship, the offspring of which include research collaborations on diverse issues covering topical themes in the humanities and social sciences in Nigeria in particular and Africa at large. It has kept bringing us benefits from publications in different forms, translations, occasional monographs, full-length studies, to seminars, roundtables, conferences, symposia, workshops, field trips, field work, film screenings, fellowship, lecturership, postgraduate supervision, and not excluding everyday chit chat on work in progress and matters arising therefrom. The journeys of our collaboration cover the whole range of endeavors that such intellectual camaraderie generates, and on behalf of the staff and students of IASUI, I want to express deep gratitude to IFRA for making genuine and lasting contributions to the enlivening and engaging atmosphere in which we do our work at IASUI. We will continue to work together in this spirit. As is to be expected, the theme of this anniversary conference is quite topical: digital humanities, the frontier, the final frontier of the decolonization of knowledge. It is posed as a question, and it is an urgent question. The common saying that the world has gone digital recently became quite significant for us in Nigeria, following the federal government's indefinite suspicion of Twitter operations from the Nigerian cyberspace. The implications of this suspension and of the proposed slew of new regulations for both digital economy, for which we have a dedicated federal ministry, and the knowledge economy are matters we are yet to fully come to terms with. But as we observe and experience the unraveling of the ongoing situation, we have the benefit of this anniversary conference as a platform for deliberating critically on the potentialities of the digital humanities in regard to in regard to knowledge production in Africa. The proposition of a global village may sound reassuring to many of us whose bodies may reside in cities, even though we know that our souls, our umbilical cords, our family are at in the villages that our lineages hail from. But being ingrained villagers, we must not take this reassurance of a global village for granted. What place is there for us who live on this side of the digital divide to participate equitably, with ease and competence, with digital savvy and open access? In this global village, are there chiefs and are there commoners in the village? In this village, what determines chieftaincy in the global village? Or in other words, can the digital humanities erase and even out the dichotomies of privilege in a geopolitical hierarchized global knowledge production system? It seems I'm asking my own questions before the question and answer session. I know that we all have questions and we will have the time to ask them. For we have planned a full day's conference. May it open up vistas in a quest for answers. I congratulate IFRA on its 30th anniversary and on the idea of a conference on this theme. The season has imposed certain constraints on us in organizing this event. Ordinarily, for such a momentous occasion, we would have had a crowd larger than the Lady Bank Anthony Hall can contain. But such are the times, and yet we must celebrate and deliberate in spite of these constraints. I wish all of us an engaging time. We are all welcome to this birthday party. One anniversary, IFRA. Thank you very much. On behalf
Thank you, Dr. Utayo. Thank you for your very kind words, much appreciated, Um, Dr. Aremu, would you like to come to the floor, please? I've got it here in case you need it. It's already there for you.
Thank you very much. I acknowledge the presence of the acting Vice Chancellor of the university, being represented by the Provost of the Postgraduate College, Professor J.O. Babalola. You're welcome, sir. And all directors, past directors, present directors of IFRA, live or online, live physical or live online. We have two lives now. Okay. And all directors of the Institute of African Studies. On behalf of the acting VC and management of UI, I warmly welcome participants at this conference to celebrate the 30 years of IFRA in Nigeria. I welcome you to the University of Ibadan, which remains the best, the first, and the best. We want to congratulate IFRA, past, present directors and all staff, beneficiaries and stakeholders, the French Ministry for Foreign and European Affairs, as well as the French Center for Scientific Research, and in addition, the Institute of African Studies on this great occasion. But as we are doing that, we're also congratulating ourselves as the University of Ibadan for hosting IFRA for 30 years and maintaining a relationship that has not terminated for 30 years. And I think that's something great to be celebrated. This relationship has yielded different kinds of outputs and outcomes. And for that, we are very happy. There are many benefits from both sides, but one that needs to be very well mentioned is the fact that IFRA has immensely contributed to the feasibility of the University of Ibadan. And in essence, you have been part of why UI is ranked the first in the country, the 8th in Africa, and amongst the top 500 universities according to the Popular Times Higher Education Rankings. So for that, we are celebrating together, and we know that this will go further. And IFRA has done this through many activities, promoting excellent and cutting-edge researches, Nigeria-made researches, according to what I've said. And it has also done so by enhancing collaborative work between scholars from France and other West African countries where the presence of IFRA is, and through so many other things, publications, workshops, trainings, residencies, and so many. All these have added to what UI is even at this time. Choosing to celebrate the 30th anniversary with a conference of this nature themed Digital Humanities, the final frontier for decolonization of knowledge, is another testimony to the commitment of IFRA to take on contemporary issues that are globally relevant, locally impacting, and engaging for academics. I have a background in engineering, and when I veered into the humanities, I carried the mind of my 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. It has always been 4. But by the time I went into the field of education, I started wondering, I started to gain the kind of reflective discourse that is part of the processes of humanities. I had to query why 2 plus 2 has to be 4, why it wouldn't be 22, and what is the significance of such symbolic representations. So many things as I entered into that area, I had to interrogate them, and it's really beneficial. So when I have further been, now I am in the field of educational technology, and I've further been able to bring all these things together. My humanities reflective mindset, the skills in technology, and my background in education, the pedagogy. And that was why I was so much interested when I found out the theme of this conference. To me, having a conference around digital humanities is a testimony to what technology could offer all disciplines in the 21st century, and especially the post-COVID-19 era, where technology is woven intricately into the new normal. I have also looked at some of the digital humanities projects. They are very interesting. Initiated by IFRA, mentioned some, and I have had a lot of aha moments. In fact, it's quite exciting. It's something to look at. The various presentations, I know, both papers and projects in this conference, attest to the high level of discussions that will take place, and I know the outcome will not only answer the question of the decolonization of knowledge, but the outcome will further enhance the international and intercultural understanding and competencies of participants, which include UI staff also, and by extension, its students. This enhancement of the international and intercultural understanding is one of the core rationale for internationalization of the University of Ibadan. The implication is that IFRA And also the celebration of this 30th year in Nigeria is helping to fulfill the vision of the Office of International Programs that I lead now. And that is to enlarge the university's frontiers of international relationship. For this, we are very grateful because you're helping us to fulfill our vision. The OIP serves as UI's window to the world, and we seek to promote UI's vision of internationalization, ensuring international visibility of UI, and serve as university liaison with various international agencies, amongst others. We hope that our relationship with IFRA and other collaborations that was enabled through IFRA, for example, the Sciences Pole, would continue to help in promoting the mission of OIP and by implication, the vision of the University of Ibadan. We look forward to IFRA supporting the midwifing of other relationships and activities that would advance this cause. We would like to once again welcome our stakeholders and participants, firstly to this great university and to this celebration of the 30th anniversary. Take time to look around within the COVID-19 protocols and interact especially with UI. You will discover what makes us the first and the best. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Aremu. Again, some very kind words. You know, and it's, there's a pride, I think, for me to be here at UI. And I must say, like, you know, when I tell my colleagues, you know, abroad, I know, and when I work in Nigeria, I work at UI, people are like, wow, you work at UI. So that's, you know, that's always very pleased to be here. Without further ado, I think now I'm looking forward to our keynote address. But before, let me tell you a few words. You know, a few words. I must say that, you know, my pride to work at UI also comes from the fact I'm in the Institute of African Studies, and this is an important place, as I said before, not for just because, you know, it's just not just a building, obviously, but because it's intellectual contribution to so many debates since 1962. And here we're lucky enough to have Professor Layiwola, who's going to talk to us today. But I must say, you know, that's why we all wanted to organize this conference, and that's, you know, that's this content I'm really, really looking forward to hear, to listen to, and to learn, basically. So thank you. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have to hold? Do I have to hold this? Thank you very much. I would like to say a big thank you to the University of Ibadan, to the Institute of African Studies, as well as to IFRA. I'm grateful for the very generous comments you've made, along with the director of the Institute of African Studies and the director of OIP. We live in very peculiar times, but the great thing about humanity, in spite of our skepticism, is that we're able to try as much as is possible to surmount the difficulties, including the wearing of masks. Thank you all for coming. I have seen people from far and wide, and some of our colleagues from Ile-Ife arrived very early this morning. This also is a testimony to the great work that IFRA has been doing here. And we've been extremely lucky that the authorities of the French embassy have always carefully selected the candidates for the directorship of IFRA, such that many of them, virtually all of them, have brought honor to their own institution and to their own country. So thank you very much, Vincent. I'm grateful to the authorities of the University of Ibadan, the Vice Chancellor, represented by the Provost of the Postgraduate School. Our teachers, some of our teachers are here. And in spite of the fact that they're octogenarians, they are able to wake up in good time to be here with us. We're very grateful, sir and ma'ams, for coming. Digital humanities and the challenge of decolonization. An assessment. What about digital humanities or digital media? From the early debates on the form, content, and methodologies of the discipline of digital humanities, it is clear that the pioneers and the initiators of the newfound field were anxious to establish a framework for the subjects. Initially identified as humanities computing, some of the pioneers like Susan Schriebam, Ray Siemens, and John Unsworth were keen on academically mainstreaming the courses and calling for annual or biennial conferences to establish an academic and research forum for digital humanities. It didn't take time to discard of humanities computing, in spite of the fact that computer is key to it and is crucial. But they quickly discarded humanities computing as a name to adopt digital humanities. The series of debates in 2016 and on what digital humanities was very humbling and very impressive. There was a big debate in 2016, started in 2011 at the MLA meeting in the United States. And then it broadened out and everybody started asking questions. And then they came together in 2016 and had a big debate. And this has produced a lot of publications in support of digital humanities. I particularly found Kathleen Fitzpatrick's article, The Humanities Done Digitally. It will appear to be some form of conflation of ideas, which occasionally would appear straight, at other times contradictory. Very enthusiastic and auspicious from the general debate which took place. And from this general debate, immediately, two schools of thought emerged. First, those who suggest that digital humanities should be about making archives, tools, and new digital methods. And second, those who argue that it ought to include interpreting of data, language, and images. What these instantly bear out is that peculiar methodological intersections between theory and practice, especially in the context of the evident multidisciplinarity of the field in question, is very, very germane. Kathleen Fitzpatrick's pragmatic point here must be commended, namely that there should not necessarily be tensions in the theory versus practice divide. This is because even the boundaries between the critical and the creative are often arbitrary. After all, the best scholarship is always creative, and the best practice is always critically aware. The digital humanities spectrum would therefore seem to be a new space in the academy, whereby the methodological curve between making and interpreting might flatten or mediate in productive and meaningful ways. This field should therefore be used to open avenues for elaboration and prospects of true interdisciplinary, which is an aspiration for the decolonization of knowledge in the academy, whereby the new field of digital humanities will reinforce the broad role of mainstream human and social sciences, rather than become their rival like STEM, you know. STEM is the acronym for science, of course, technology, mathematics, engineering, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And you know, of course, that there had been practical rivalry between the humanities, the human and the social sciences, and STEM, especially when it comes to the fierce competition for funding and for support and for recognition. Perhaps even more fundamental was the traditional skepticism that is usual for emergent new fields whose fault lines derive from inherently disruptive nature, which threatens the foundation of established or guaranteed order that have been the mainstay of institutional academic practice and traditions. All new fields challenge tradition. All new fields challenge orthodoxy. And so it is the same with digital humanities. And we do know that some people are still very suspicious of it. This is succinctly reflected in the observation that even amongst DH, that is digital humanities scholars, fault lines have emerged between those who use new digital tools to aid relatively traditional scholarly projects and those who believe that it is a disruptive political or ideological initiative with the potential to reshape fundamental and normative aspects of standard academic practice. For those of us who live in the cultural enclave usually termed the Third World or the Global South, as evident in the abstract which is incident to this paper, the ideas resonate, and they are sometimes very, very deep. This is because of the disjunctive nature of the political domination that had characterized the history of our industrial experience with the global north. As I shall point out later in this paper, this unease peculiarly derives from our recent experience with selective globalization and the age of social media, which has turned out to be the precursor of digital humanities. These movements, with their peculiar algorithms, have constantly subverted those traditional values contingent on and compatible with the humane practice of letters and metadata. The excellent anthology on debates in the digital humanities, edited by Matthew Gold, published in 2012, cooperating with digital humanities scholars, seem to have come at a most critical period for the development of the new field, given the stir and the attention that digital humanities gained at the 2011 convention of the Modern Languages Association of America. The scholarly bravado of the University of Nebraska specialist, DH specialist, and called Stephen Ramsey, seem to have challenged colleagues to call for a more forthright definition of what the divide between regular humanities and digital humanities should be. Each person, of course, will seek to protect his or her turf. And this is understandable, especially when a field is new and is seeking to be established. Though there were some earlier pioneering texts in the field, such as Hiribarren, Siemens, and Unsworth's edited companion to Digital Humanities, which was published by Blackwell in 2004, and Hiribarren and Siemens edited volumes soon after the 2011 convention, and its rippling debates years after, truly created the defining moment for the understanding and advocacy that DH, or digital humanities, truly needed for legitimacy. However, there is no way the emergence of a broad digital humanities field can have its pedagogy and methodology completely laid out within just a few years of professional and scholarly practice. Our characteristic contention at this timely conference will be its future and the decolonial agenda hitherto pursued by the cultural evolution of the humanities and the social sciences in Africa, particularly. This point cannot be gainsaid given the strident calls on the need to decolonize language, decolonize curricula, and their various methodologies. It would appear that the colonial project gave freedom to material existence only to lay stranglehold upon the minds of the colonial subjects to keep them in permanent atrophy and wasting inertia. Matthew Gould's introductory essay, The Digital Humanities Movement, does affirm that the publication of the debates on the digital humanities is not necessarily a celebration of the new concept, but also an interrogation of it. It rightly reinforces what we expect as the DH's instrumentality for the attainment of affirmative action in the humanities as a composite whole. And this will seem to have informed the theme of the conference, which the directors left with a question mark. The constant need for cultural inclusivity. The very strident and cautionary note in Alan Liu's insistence on the role of cultural criticism in digital humanities is a confirmation of the yearning for inclusiveness and equity in the interaction between society and the digital revolution. This, of course, assumes that most human movements in society are neither ideologically nor politically neutral. That is why Stephen Ramsey's assertion on who can be or not be a digital humanist ruffled not a few feathers in the ranks of the humanistic scholars at that meeting. The instigation of boundaries in the various brands of the human and the social sciences can be frightfully unwholesome. Though the discipline of digital humanities took off from the preoccupation of the humanities in general and the subsequent evolution of communication and digital media, but it threatens to align more specifically with computer, electronic, and engineering studies. It is not out of place to recount from the history of modern literary theory to see that there is a systematic progression in the humanities to culture the imagination for futuristic digital discoveries. Take, for instance, the roots of Russian formalism as embedded in Viktor Shklovsky's 1914 essay on futuristic poetry titled The Resurrection of the Word. The political pressure on Shklovsky's caused him to recount in January 1930 after so much pressure, given the political situation in the USSR, as we all know. But this was not before Trotsky did a critique of formalism in his Literature and Revolution in 1923. After 1930, when the core of Russian further development of formalism gave way to the evolution of new criticism, a major basic difference between Russian formalism and Anglo-American new criticism is that the former places premium on form or structure in literary works, while the latter considers that both form and content are crucial to the appreciation of any work of art. In all these movements, language and linguistics have always been central, sine qua non, for the study of literature and for the study of society, especially when you seek to build structures and to build patterns. It is a very sure-footed person who is grounded in language and in culture, who is able to discern the minutiae of the differences between the various perceptions. Now, the emergence of structuralism and post-structuralism as a literary and linguistic theory has always been considered a revolutionary development. This is most aptly represented by Jean-Marie Benoit, a book called La Révolution structurelle, published in 1976. I have not looked for a French reference because the French have organized this conference. So but this is the truth. This is an objective fact. This is not necessarily a political revolution in the sense of the Bolshevik Revolution, but in the sense of a radical academic implication and scope of reference in the arts and the social sciences. And Anne Jefferson represents it thus. But what must finally be regarded, and I quote her, but what must finally be regarded as its most revolutionary feature is the importance that it attributes to language. Not only is language a major preoccupation of structuralist thinking, but language itself is used as a model for all sorts of non-linguistic institutions. So say 1995. The rigor with which structuralism applies language to the rules of criticism is exceptional. French structuralism is applied to a wide range of intellectual and scientific disciplines in the sense in which Ferdinand Saussure meant it to be a comprehensive science of science. Semiology. That is semiology or semiotics, a philosophical theory of the function of signs and symbols in society. Saussurean linguistics considers language not only as an archetypal model of social expression and creativity, but also as a complex and comprehensive system reflecting the patterns of other creative and expressive systems in human societies. Given this exemplary and lofty status, language represents the exemplar for all branches of semiology. This changed the perspective in the human and social sciences beyond mere collection of empirical and field data, as well as beyond verifiable and positivist understanding of material science. Instead, it became the greater game of perceiving objective reality as signs and symbols with meanings in conventions, in systems, and modes of external apprehensions beyond their inherent features. Claude Lévi-Strauss became a great proponent of this new pattern of reasoning in his idea of structural anthropology. This highlights that modes of positivist apprehension of reality goes beyond the mere scientific assumption that statistical data are inherent objective facts, but that they are structured like linguistic models. This indicates also that even isolated facts are part of a systemic model with meanings beyond themselves, as in signs and symbolic representation of reality. It is therefore the duty of the anthropologist, the human or social scientist, to decipher the systemic order of which each individual objective reality is a part of the greater systemic network of the cultural whole. This would mean that each affective reality is always part of a cognitive whole. Isolated cultural observations partake of multitudes as a cognitive and a systemic function, and within the ambience of their own cultural implications and realities. Beyond positivism, therefore, culture is structured like a linguistic system. If you look at Barthes' own writings, Roland Barthes, structuralism in representing reality in cultural codes thus paves the way for new forms of logarithms and coding for what we now remotely perceive as extrapolations in the analogies of digital humanities. Though the roots of such extrapolations arose from essentializing language as a system of viewing the world, it provides the window to the heart of all humanistic endeavors. It protects the human scientists from being a victim of perceiving the world in fractions rather than as integral wholes. I have delved into this aspect of literary theory and criticism because most resources in the curricula of cultural studies and digital humanities, and even gender studies, were first cited in English Studies departments. Alan Liu, in his excellent article in Debates in the Digital Humanities, clearly identifies how the digital humanities has begun to isolate itself from the general pool of the humanities, almost losing its identity in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics genealogy. This is because of its updates and affiliation with computer science and its applications in digital analysis. Quite frankly, it is patent that digital humanities also has an index finger and a toe in library, archival, and information studies, and constantly invents the tools for digitization and informatics. This gives the girth to garner attention in the breakneck competition and speed to harness resources and dominance in the politics of funding within the academy and outside of it. Alan Liu has put the cautionary note so succinctly but stridently that digital humanities need to show that critical thinking about our resources scales into thinking critically about power, finance, and other governance protocols of the world. Let's move on to culture, subculture, and anti-culture. In thinking aloud, whilst the blend of new media, that is Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram, WhatsApp, email, and what have you, and the growing market of newfangled network facilities are growing, cultural and normative linguistic expressions are also facing challenges. In what might look like a cultural revolution zeitgeist, the modes of expression in traditional grammar and the revolution that structuralism and post-structuralism had boosted into semiotics of signs and wonders, the icons of representational expressions are changing to suit personal convenience, individual convenience. Traditional old school teachers are complaining that spellings of classroom primers are being willfully altered, sometimes damaged. They believe that a generation of cyber-savvy teens and young adults are pulling the carpet from under their feet and pulling wool over their faces because they are computer and internet savvy, and because they are also more familiar with some of these digital tools. So the older generation no longer recognizes the words, alphabets, and the semantic sequences representing the traditional lexicons they are used to. The new subcultures is subversive of the old order, and is at best generative of a supraculture, or at the very worst, an anti-culture, and a new generation of geniuses and mavericks who are busy working away on these digital tools, inventing blogs, inventing digital spaces for themselves. We may never be able to have digital humanities get a handle over this digital superhighway, as the digital bandwidth races far ahead of the rest of us. For all you care, the digital and economic rivalry between world superpowers are sometimes fingered as responsible for a systemic history of modern literary theory. Now, are responsible for our epidemic woes and vaccine challenges, COVID not accepted. In following the long systematic history of modern literary theory, we note the fact that digital humanities and cultural studies had their origins in the humanities, in English studies departments. We can also surmise that both disciplines, along with media studies, can be described as Paul Willis noted it. And which he does in his foreword to Chris Barker's encyclopedic book on cultural studies, that DH, or digital humanities, can be intractable and can be described as a non-disciplinary discipline, meaning that we're all qualified irrespective of our domains, academic domains, to becoming digital humanists. Our advocacy for digital humanities is that apart from forging its hardcore partnership with the core humanities, should also become the advocacy agency for the rest of the humanities as a whole. It will indeed be a gain if that were to happen. And hopefully it should happen for the decolonization of knowledge to be realized. To be able to bridge the gap between the historical development of literary and linguistic theory and the era of digital humanities and the new media, digital humanities needs a good dose of cultural criticism as a stable center of tradition generating continuity and formulae. Data and metadata can therefore be both quantitative and qualitative, as sign and as symbol in the same hermeneutic corpus. I completely agree with Alan Liu that in terms of pedagogy, the text should be the starting point, and thereafter closely followed by such other methodological factors as text analysis, topic modeling, data mining, pattern recognition, and visualization. So what has globalization to do with it? It should be clear that historicity matters and should always be established by the convocation and enlistment of the need to have a back-end understanding of the emergence of symbols in the evolution of subfields in the humanities. As much as is possible in the framework of post-structuralism, multilingualism and multiculturalism are always implied in the apprehension of semiology. All new fields remotely or directly connect and correspond with their antecedents to create the necessary synergy for futuristic developments and objective analysis. It also promotes awareness and transforms the potential and possibilities in defense of the arts and its methods. Creativity and vision always go hand in hand. Globalism and globalization actually came with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the visions of the men and women behind those walls on both sides of the divide. Globalism is therefore a double-edged sword. While globalization itself, expected to be a seamless purveyor of equity and beneficial development on a broad scale, especially with trade, commerce, and other forms of exchange modalities between nations of the world, each being reality or community expects to bring its own accomplishments to the market table as a global component. Now, the truth, however, is that the theory of development, particularly in post-colonies and most of the global south, with a heavy carrying capacity of indebtedness and poverty, always presents an overwhelming paradox, contrary to what globalization portended or advised us to believe. In Jean Kachiga's words, which I took from a compilation on globalization, and I quote him, "This current stage is in itself a paradox, since globalization implies inclusion in one global market system, but carries at the same time the dangers of marginalizing those entities not able to sustain the forces of a free market enterprise. The illustrations," end of quote. "The illustrations from the examples of the realities and the complexities of globalization are profoundly instructive. Each of the colonies subverts its own decolonial potentials and propensities. Hence, the recurrence of cultural critique and criticism in scholarship and in methodology. A most illuminating example comes from Mikhail Janis's analogy of creating or establishing a cultural identity in an era of multiculturalism and multimedia, both of which are reminiscent of postmodernism. He uses Jean-Paul Sartre's profiling of Jean Genet in his warning both citizens and subjects of the post-colony of the danger of making oneself what others have chosen to make of him or herself. Both self and self-consciousness are forever in a flux, constantly mediated by the activity of the preying, not praying, or praying, the P-R-E-Y, not the praying people. Both self and self-consciousness are forever in a flux, constantly mediated by the activity of the preying and poaching of others who watch and comment as sufficiently as their indulgent desires and reflection permits. The rather dicey position of identity construction in Africa and the post-colonial world in a global system of images always begs the question in Genet's profile of not making oneself what the hostile other might have made of one, especially when the image is not flattering at all. The only way out of this in a new global hyperreality is to strategically negotiate between the constraints of free will and the cultural and social constructedness of being. And this is found in Baudrillard, Janis, and a few other scholars. This generates a double-barreled privilege of constituting the strategic advantage of building both a bridge as well as a border at the same time. Market economy had always created the driving force for capitalization in the advent of new technologies and the new media. The tendency for digital humanities to join the rat race is high, especially as competitiveness is not a watchword in the media, is, well, much of a watchword in the media industry. This factor, along with the goodwill of internet activists, can always boost the chances of digital humanities to become becoming the new advocate for the promotion of mainstream humanities. We all know that the focus of public education is democratized in that social media partner with online media in the dissemination of information and news items. Computer hardware has conveniently overtaken even the mass media and the various components in radio and television, which are now generally licensed as personal or domestic means of information. Digital media has speed, it has immediacy, it has efficiency, and will no doubt become the major organ of operation in the advocacy for conventional humanities. If we move a step on to digitizing humanities in a global pool, what does it look like? One economic factor that Microsoft has popularized through its principal, perhaps I should mention his name, is the language of monopoly as the means of controlling the market. If DH, that's digital humanities, diligently partners mainstream humanities, the threat of marginalization might be assuaged instead of the recent tendencies to emasculate the core humanities from the advantage enjoyed or the various advantages enjoyed in the public sector, lopsided funding of STEM. Collins, Graham, and Loxley in the Media Reader, published in 1999, have observed that, and have rightly observed, that the preservation of national sovereignty and identity has become increasingly difficult since the combined capacity of economic and cultural production and consumption have become increasingly transnational. It is also true that since the advent of digital humanities, it is also increasingly difficult to ignore the gravitational as well as the centripetal pull of media technology on the core humanities. Though the humanities continue to be the intellectual partner in this business, it is increasingly difficult to underestimate the commercial and ideological pool of media institutions. For these multinational media institutions, and fortunately, unfortunately for digital humanities, it must brace itself as the pragmatic and user interface for the core and archival humanities. This adds up to what Alan Liu and Kathleen Fitzpatrick in 2012 and 2016 have always represented as the digital humanities' role in cultural advocacy. For digital and media institutions, globalization refers to a global outreach in terms of distribution, outlets, financial base, audiences, consumers, products or texts, as well as ownership and a management base. This begins to gravitate towards finance and capital, no doubt, and ultimately towards control, competition, and of course, cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism in small letters. This is where the core humanities lose control and the tail begins to wag the dog. And if the digital humanities recognize its role as a cultural advocate for the entire human and the social sciences, so that at least for once, the dog can wag the tail in a gentle manner. It is clear from the draft of our narrative why we might begin to ask what the fate of the post-colony is in the great pool and the shark-infested waters of the digital and new media. It is also a matter of steep conjecture whether the digital humanities could be the final frontier for the true decolonization of knowledge. We might have to reconfigure the algorithms of decoloniality in the age of digital media and the humanities. But this, after interrogating or problematizing the role of digital media and humanities in cultural as well as in educational institutions. I'm gradually winding up. If we devolve to globalization in cultural and media institutions, let us see what we may find. There is no doubt that digital humanities is a media arm of the humanities and an interface between technology and the human and social sciences. It therefore stands to reason that on an economy of scale, it should assume an advocacy role for the humanities as a whole. It is patent that the developed world has a monopoly of digital culture, but the developing world is not completely excluded from it. As Grimy Button says, indigenous cultures do not die in their feet, even if they do change. The Japanese and Southeast Asians have long begun their writing back to the center of the digital empires. Aspects of popular cultures in sub-Saharan Africa are also showing signs of writing and speaking back to the colonial empires, but they are still at the margins because of poor political and intellectual leadership. But the potentials and the capacities subsist, waiting to be harnessed and activated. Jazz, blues, rock, Afro-pop, theater, and film have exhibited phenomenal potentials and have contributed with premium originality to world culture and globalization within the quid pro quo culture of give and take. It is true that in Southern Africa, some of the popular township music is hybrid. But this is patent given the long nightmare of political and cultural subjugation in that region. But the indigenous brand in West African high life and Afro-pop rival the very best of the classical genres from other metropolitan centers of the world. We must, however, acknowledge that the behemoth of the media in terms of television, film, theaters, news media, archives, museums, universities, and other cultural establishments are securely domiciled in the Western world, and more recently in, well, contemporary in China. From there, the rest of the global South is constantly pushed to the periphery by an inimitable digital centrifugal spin. In sociological terms, it can be safely argued that this produces a branded view of the world, and by which other views may be debated, presented, or judged. This mode of control raises questions about terms and conditions of reference for regulation, for patents and legitimacy for the post-colony on the modes of production and the field of view, which are political, which are imbalanced, which are steep, and which are devastatingly ideological. In this respect, we already know that the world of digital humanities and media are not free of assumptions and significations. This leads to a certain brand of globalization that is as significant as the debates of cultural imperialism and marginalization. The hegemonic slant, as well, the hegemonic slant, both in terms of production and consumption in the academies, as well as in media establishments, all of them are full of assumptions. We had earlier emphasized that technology interfaces digital humanities with the rest of the human and social sciences, as well as libraries, archives, and digital studios. But it must also be emphasized that new technologies tend to develop interactively. Digital humanities continue to evolve, following alternating advancements in digital logarithms in relation to how print media also develops. At first, there was a gradual evolution in the use of satellite and cable links to send source materials and compose images from one location to the other. Subsequently, there appeared lighter and portable computers that enabled reporters in the field to compose news and send copies down the line rather than use telephones to copy back to base. In terms of institutional methodology and monopoly, lateral rather than vertical integration predominates with digital humanities, which then makes it easier to achieve systemic harmony with the rest of the humanistic field. In terms of income and economic empowerment, digital humanities uses new media and technology in new and diverse ways to generate new types of hard and soft incomes to facilitate the online movement of data and programs. For instance, interactive TV, live e-commerce, or like e-commerce online, has grown in preference and profitability despite the scandalous crash of .com. Grimy Button again confirms this by citing the instance of Barry Diller's USA Interactive, which he claims is now worth more than Amazon.com. In its provision of home shopping channels, e-travel agency, hotel and accommodation reservations, e-dating service, Ticketmaster for booking concerts and sports, and online lending and mortgage services. Digital media has invented new businesses and companies, which were not heard of hitherto. In the same vein, digital humanities can revolutionize the working life of institutions, academics, and communities. There are further examples from computer-assisted animation and digital graphics for movies and adverts. There are now digicam images from war zones, remote areas of natural disasters, and graphic marine ocean depths. Fieldworks and ecotourism can now be programmed from laboratories and remote locations. And indeed, there are now laboratories for the humanities. So much for the merits and propensities of digital and new media. It is now time to turn to our hopes on digital humanities. We cannot but be impressed in the steady advance of digital humanities in less than 2 decades and the extent to which it has impacted the mainstream practice of the humanities itself. It is also remarkable if, with a backward gaze, we realize that it was only in 1894 that the first school of English was established at Oxford University, while the one at Cambridge University followed 2 years after. Thereafter, the first chair of English studies was appointed in 1917. The more expansive field of cultural studies grew out of the English departments in the late 1950s because the voice and the tongue of the British Empire naturally emerged from the studies of the language of the empire. It naturally emerged as a broad interdisciplinary field, which included cultural anthropology and even philosophy. It had taken another half a century for the emergence of another interdisciplinary field of digital humanities, initially domiciled in the same School of English Studies. There is something spectacular in the relevance of language, literature, and the scientific engagement of science, signals, and signification as the cultural greenhouse for the evolution of these inclusivist fields of human endeavor. The immediate advantage of the field is its ability to bring so many other mutually receptive fields together under the same umbrella. The strength and the future of digital humanities lies in how well it can help bind the other arms of the humanities together. In its contribution to the first post-colonial conference we held in Northern Ireland in 1996, Bill Ashcroft believed that the distinct discipline of English studies has only another century before it expires. I believe that Ashcroft's rhetorical assertion has to do with the various metamorphoses of English studies module into other empirical fields of study rather than the outright extinction of the English as a distinct curriculum. Perhaps digital humanities is also one of the purveyors of the end of English studies as we used to know it. Alan Lewin, suggesting a unique leadership opportunity for the digital humanities, suggests that it could create, adapt, and disseminate new methods of communicating between the humanities and the public. He believes that an open journal system, OJS publication platform, could be created to facilitate and manage online journals. This, as has been rightly observed, provides additional reading tools that could assist scholars and the public with research and information gathering. There is the added possibility with synthesized text analysis, as well as extraction tools and output platforms. DH could help balance, that is digital humanities, could help balance text with science and images and image support or timeline widgets with various posts, options, customizations, and links. This will help liberate scholarship from the strict document format and generate imaginative, high-impact briefs for the humanities. There is therefore a sense in which digital humanities could champion a new wave of town-gown connection, indicating trust and cooperation as the basis of driving balance and decolonized development. There is also a sense by which we could incorporate computer graphics design as a modeling component of digital humanities, such that performance, theater, and entertainment are constantly mediated by digital aids and technology. At the same time, it is true that caution might not be out of place for the specific and general abuse that digital technology can inflict on society by media and technology hacktivists, not activists alone, hackers and hacktivists. But in and out of the 29 chapters in one of the extraordinary compendiums on debates in the digital humanities, the conclusions are all pretty similar. One, that digital humanities has a promising institutional future. Two, that it should concentrate on research and development in core areas of text encoding, text analysis, pattern discovery, creation of archives and resources. Three, interface with new media, information and communication technology and science technology studies. Four, form a strong link with society and culture. Five, mediate between low-level resources and high-level application on cultural issues. We must help to forge a composite and inclusive methodology for the humanities without mutual sectional discrimination. Digital humanities has become a field of academic and research endeavor that has joined the university curriculum for good, and research chairs already endowed. There are at least 100 digital humanities centers worldwide, an established journal which is called Digital Humanities Quarterly, and an umbrella organization named Alliance of Digital Humanities Organization, the ADHO, which is very influential and has become very powerful. I shall like to conclude by telling a digital analogical narrative. In the fall of 1996, exactly 2 decades before the publication of the debates in the digital humanities, there was a gathering of scholars, media activists, and public intellectuals to discuss the peculiarity of post-colonial identities around the world. The location was in a most unlikely place, a frontier city in Northern Ireland, Armagh, a province in the middle of a supremacist battle between the empire and her white post-colonials. Because there are black post-colonials and there are white post-colonials. The host was the Queen's University of Belfast. The South African poet, Dennis Brutus, had remarked in one of the plenary sessions that in an era of digital technology, a mere touch of a digital button could move fast financial capital over mind-boggling distances in a matter of seconds. Very, very true. At the time, the EU initiatives were programming monies to encourage what they termed European digital cultural content. Declan Kibert, a university professor from the University College Dublin, reminded us all that apart from the mutual experience of a temperate climate, Ireland shares nothing else with Western Europe. Finally, a female digital media practitioner, Gemma Tipton, said the internet began as a communication system between specialized groups, scientists, the universities, and the military, but that it has moved out of the hands of its users and providers and that we have relinquished our power over it for a sense of confidence. She then concluded, it is our intellectual insecurity that is colonizing the internet. The import of my digital anecdote makes a fundamental allusion to the fact that our control over digital humanities and cultural instrumentalism has great hopes and potentials, but will need time and a multivalent methodology to engage our colonial agenda. And when we do arrive there, it might be well to say that that will be the time to begin to call for the challenge to the frontiers of colonialism and exclusion. I'm grateful to IFRA once again for the platform you've offered, and I'm grateful to all of you for your attention.
Thank you, Prof, for this very, very fascinating lecture, which showed us actually how, how complicated this field can be as well. Because what I remember here is that all the nuances you tried to bring to the table here. You know, you talked about literature, you talked about linguistics, you talked about semiotics, you talked about history, cultural studies. The list could be long, but you know, today we're going to hear as well linguists. We're going to talk about archaeology tomorrow as well. I think, you know, the first thing I remember here in my concluding remarks is that, you know, it's a very, you know, wild field. And the second thing is that we, as reminded us, we have had quite a few debates over the last 2 decades. We're not here to reinvent the wheel, but basically what happens is that people have debated the meaning of digital humanities. And I'm talking about the word meaning because actually is that meaning is what we're looking for here. What are we trying to do here with digital humanities? is, are we trying to change what we used to do in the past in our own disciplines? Are we inventing a new language to work together in a very interdisciplinary manner? Because that's what I remember here. Now with digital humanities, I can talk to people in literature, in English departments. I can talk to people in, different people in different departments in general. And that's maybe something which can, talk about in general. What are we trying to do? How is the humanities reinventing our own research questions and more even than our own methodologies? I will stop here, but we thank you again, Prof, for a fascinating lecture. Thank you. Thank you. Just a few words. We're gonna have a tea break now until 11 o'clock. We're gonna have a fascinating panel on languages and texts. So can I ask everyone to come back at 11 o'clock? Is that okay? If you've got any questions, please come talk to me. Thank you. See you in half an hour. Thank you. For COVID-19 reasons, I forgot to tell you that you should sit actually, and we're going to have your tea here. Okay, we're going to help you with that. Is that right? Thank you. Don't move. May I call our panelists to the table, please? Well, yeah, sorry. Do you want to come in, please? Welcome back, everyone. I'm looking forward to our very first panel on text analysis. Why? Because actually, digital humanities actually started with linguistics in general. I know that for a fact. I'm a historian. I'm jealous. I wish you had started with history, but no, it's not true. It started with linguistics and language analysis, without doubt. The second thing I like to say is that we are lucky enough to have one of the members of our scientific committee to be our moderator, and I'll talk to her right now to check that the sound's working with Ademide. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Good morning.
Ademide, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Good morning.
Good morning, Carol. Sorry for you. Sorry. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for staying up late at night with us. Much appreciated. I'm looking forward to our very first panel on text analysis. Why? Because actually, today we're gonna have our two first groups. Just to warn you that the second speaker is nowhere to be found for the moment, but I promise you we'll find him. We'll do our best. I'll track him down. So, should we start? Are you ready? Should have your PowerPoint presentation on, please. Okay. I'll talk to her right now to check that the sound's working with Ademide. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you seem to be echoing. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Good morning. My sound is actually very delayed.
Why? Because actually,
I can hear you, but you seem to be echoing. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Good morning.
Yes, we're good at Ademide. We're just going to try. There's a bit of a lag, so I apologize for that. We're going to do our best to fix this.
My sound is actually very delayed.
We're going to start with the panel.
Good morning. I'm Gloria, and I'll be co-presenting with Confidence. Together, we are representing our team, and we are working on the project entitled Towards Creating Textual Communities of West African Cultural Forms. And our aim is to curate, cultural forms in order for educational purposes and also for archiving purposes. And we intend to do
actually very delayed.
We intend to do that by reproducing or recreating these forms, these cultural forms in multimodal approaches or contents. Good morning. I'm Gloria, and I'll be co-presenting with Confidence. Together, we are representing our team, and we are working on the project titled Slides. Okay. Okay. The next slide, please. Since we'll be looking at textual community, it is necessary that we effectively conceptualize what textual community means. But first, the phrase, it's a recent coinage, and according to Oxford reference, it refers to a place or social circle where manuscript texts are or were produced, read, and circulated by and for certain groups. But with respect to this study, we'll be looking at textual communities as a collection of cultural forms explored by a community of collaborative researchers. And like I said earlier, our intention is to curate as well as archive these cultural forms. Now, as a group, all we do is hint on the principle of textual community. Please, the next slide. Thank you. Is hint on the principles of textual communities. And one of it is collaboration, where we work with other team members, we work as a group, and every material, our work done by team members is acknowledged. And so we see that in this community, you cannot adequately function alone. You cannot function alone adequately. And so you need, the interdependence from other people. Next, also, another principle is the fact that, while curating these cultural forms, there is need to make these forms accessible, to the audience for free. So it's going to be an open access system. In addition, these materials will be made available in the local form as well as, in the transcribed and the translated forms. And so it's necessary that these materials are assessed independently. So if an audience wants to access either the local content, he has the opportunity to. If he wants the animated content, he has the opportunity to. Okay, and finally, the fact that in order to ensure sustenance, we have decided to curate these on the WordPress platform. And these are the principles on which our textual community will be working or functioning. Okay, quickly, examining text. For this study, we have conceptualized the text, to mean any form or symbol that elicits responses. And by symbols, we refer to, symbols are intents that convey cultural meaning. Okay, please, next slide. Now, delimiting it for the purpose of this conference, we have chosen the folk tales. And the folk tales we have chosen are, folk tales derived from the Igbo and the Urobo community. And so our materials or source texts will be published. This is the next slide. The source text will be published materials, that contain these traditional folk tales in the traditional languages. And so the data platform where we'll be, curating these cultural forms will be the WordPress. Now, why digitalize African symbols? Why digitalize these cultural forms? First, for the purpose of archiving for cultural memory. For cultural memory. And through this, we have an opportunity to have our heritages, projected to first for ourselves, for our audience, and the wider space. The second is that we're able to have a snapshot of cultural ideologies in time. And by this, I mean, we're able to know how these cultural forms have transcended over time. We'll have that. It provides such opportunity. And with this, we're creating, a space within the digital space. But we're creating a space for the Igbo folk tales and a space for the Yoruba folk tales as well within the wider digital space. It also provides, an opportunity or a platform where we can tell our own stories. We have the opportunity to tell our own stories the way we want to, tell our own narrative. And so we can choose our own heroes and we can celebrate or praise them. We can also choose our own villains and vilify them. And it also provides an opportunity and a space where we can argue about, our anti-heroes. Oh, we'll also look at, the digitalizing of African symbols also help to promote cultural cohesion. And by this, what we mean is that, every other person from other cultural spaces, have the opportunity to know what your own culture is about and identify the similarities. And through that, we can come together to build our own narratives. The sixth is increase avenues for cultural contact. Like I said, tell our own stories in our own codes, in the way where it's understood within the social context. And also contribute to the knowledge pool and not just be consumers. So with this, we are not just, consuming it for ourselves, but we are making it available to the wider audience. Next slide, please. Now, we have a sample of the Igbo text that we have curated. Now, if you look at the slides, we have the narrative in the Igbo language, and we have chosen the Nigerian pidgin. So we have the Igbo folktale in the local dialect, the Igbo dialect, and the Nigerian pidgin. Please, can you, can you just click, yes, that audio, so it can. Why his, okay, maybe we'll continue when look at the slides. We have the narrative in the Igbo language, and we have chosen the Nigerian pidgin. So we have the Igbo dialect, the Igbo dialect, and the Nigerian pidgin. Please, can you, just click here, that audio, so it can.
Leopard, elephant, tortoise, and gorilla papa join follow do guess as they get wish. None of them feel guess any of their name.
Why his
don't pass 8 nights.
okay, maybe we'll continue when look at the slides. We have the narrative in the Igbo language, and we have chosen the Nigerian pidgin. So we have the Igbo dialect and the Nigerian pidgin. Please, can you, just click here, that audio, so it can.
leopard, elephant, tortoise, and gorilla papa. Joy follow two girls as they get rich. One of them
Why is
the water don't pass it.
okay, maybe we'll continue. Look at the Igbo
Onye ọbụla nwere ike ịgwa ya aha ụmụ agbọghọ a. Ya ga-akpọ
Nigeria Freedom Peace.
ya ka ọ bụrụ nwunye. Mgbe abalị atọ
Audio
kacha,
to understand.
ụfọdụ ụmụ anụmanụ dịka agụ, enyi, mbe na ọzọ leopard, elephant, tortoise, and gorilla papa. Joy follow two girls as they get rich. One of them
Why is okay, maybe we'll continue. Look at the So, okay, sorry for that. Okay, so with the Igbo language, o ruru otu mgbe n'obodo ụmụ anụmanụ, eze anụmanụ nwere ụmụ agbọghọ atọ mara mma ukwu. Ha rụla oge ịlụ dị mana nwa nweghị onye bịara ịlụ ha. Sorry for the difference in dialects. This is the Imo. And so just like that, we also have the Nigerian pidgin form. Now, what we have done is that to enable easy translation, we have divided the folk tales, the narrative, in form of, we've made it sentential. So we've divided it, we've numbered the sentences in the narrative, and we have also, created a corresponding Nigerian pidgin form. And so you have, for this place where animal, they stay, then they stay. The Oga Patapata or king of all the animal gets 3 girl pikin, where they find well. The pikin them don't reach who go marry, but they no see husband. And so with this, we have provided the audience an opportunity where they are able to have access to the local language, know the local language for those who desire to learn it more, especially in contemporary times. And also we have provided the Nigerian pidgin. At this point, I think we'll also look at our Urhobo text.
Okay. Considering that there's a little challenge with that, I'll just go ahead to, we have another folktale here from Urhobo tribe, and it is a story of Emekbu. I'll first of all say it in Urhobo and then in Pidgin. So the story goes to us, Itaye iye, konye ayovero, odebiyemive, oderovu Emekbu dorocheko ogbein. Sina ye womremure Emekbu da karitokri ke onironye kpekirashe, kedekede onire da nekire, omewunye mikotori. Now that in Niger or Nigerian pidgin is story. You get one woman, we get 2 children. One of the pikin name na Emekbudu, the other one now obeying. So that they go see food chop. Emekbudu come they make mortar pikin for your mama to go sell for market. Every time where their mama sell finish, you go use head, take waka, go house. Okay, what we just have here is one of the folktales from Urhobo tribe. And this story as it is not the complete version, but just a sample for the sake of this presentation. And this story contains some aspects of the culture of the Urhobo people. If not for the fact that it has been presented in Urhobo language and then in Pidgin, the story may not have been known to a wider audience. That is the essence of what we are doing. Next slide, please. We have a sample of the website where we have this text, and the aim of this is to provide the text to a wider audience, and then in a bit to provide the unscripted belief, the values, the norms, the customs, traditions, which are unconsciously and consciously imbibed and orally transmitted, but limited in terms of the number of people they get to. We have created this website to achieve our aim. And the text we put in this website are in multimodal forms. We have them in text, audio, video, and pictorial form. And for the text, we have them in the indigenous language and the Nigerian Pidgin. And we also have them in English language for a wider audience, because not everybody understands the Nigerian Pidgin. And of course, not every Nigerian will understand the indigenous language. And for a wider reach, we have also provided the stories in the English language. Now, the essence of having all of this is to achieve certain aims, which foremost is to address the paucity of indigenous language content. While we are getting materials for this project, we went online to get some indigenous, some folktales, proverbs, and all in the Urhobo language and some other Nigerian indigenous languages, but we didn't get what we are looking for. If something like this had been done before now, that wouldn't have been an issue. Perhaps we'll be looking at another gap in the study of digital humanities and how they push back the frontiers of limitations in the representations of African culture, so to say. So one of the things this project does is to create a wider access to this text. For instance, I'm kind of interested in languages. I'm interested in language, and then maybe I come across an Igbo folktale. I may not be able to access that material, even though I can see it. But if I have it in Nigerian Pidgin, it gives me access to it. And also transmission. Before digitalizing these oral forms, they have been transmitted orally from one generation to another. Some of these stories do not have a specific author because they have been from time immemorial, and also some of them are communally created. So it also serves as a form of transmission. And then the transmission is having a wider reach, because unlike the generation to generation and mouth to mouth transmission, we now have the same thing, but in the digital form, thereby reaching a wider audience. And also we have a more immersive experience. For somebody to have a text available in written form, audio, video, it gives the person a better experience of that story. If I am listening to the story she just said now, just in the written form, I may read the Pidgin and have an idea of what the story says. But if I have the audio form and then I have it in pictorial form or even video, it gives me a better experience, a better relation with the text. And it also promotes enthusiasm of our culture and languages. One of the things that promotes languages is language attitude. And when people do not have a relationship with the language, the attitude may not be positive, even though not outrightly negative. So if I come across an Igbo text and then I have it in I can access it in a language that I can understand better, like Nigerian Pidgin, it may want to shape an attitude that is not also positive, all that positive, to a more positive one. Next slide, please. So, like I said, having the story in this broad form and accessible to everyone promotes the culture. For instance, the story I just said is not the full version, but from that short part, we have some themes in it already, like anthropomorphism, which is actually a key feature in African literature. And then we have a lot of things from them. For instance, death, and then occupation and all of that. That if you look at the occupation of the girl makes pesos for the mother to go sell in the market. That tells you the kind of occupation that they do. And given the kind of craft, you can easily situate that this person may be from this place. So showcasing the occupation of the people is a way of also showcasing the culture of the people. And then we see something like archetype. You know, in the African traditional belief system, there are some ideologies, there are some belief systems that are kind of general. For instance, it is believed that birth is not the beginning of life and death is not the end of it. It is more or less a transition from one phase to the other. And also in African traditional belief system, there is a belief that in the marketplace, you don't have only humans there, that the spirit, fairies also come there. So if you look at some of these stories that we have picked, these are just the samples, you see that there is more or less a theme, a recurring motif or theme around them, which is more like an archetype, because you have them in folk tales in different tribes and then in different generations as well. So now the question is, why are we using Nigerian pidgin or Niger? It has a lot of advantages. For instance, it serves the immediate audience. If we want to say that we want to make people get to know our culture more, we'll first of all serve those within the borders of Nigeria and then the wider audience. So to serve the people here, we use the Niger. Now, what we want to ask, is it easier to understand than the English language? To an extent, yes, because one thing that the Nigerian pidgin does is it has broken the barrier that education has set among people. Somebody who is not so educated may not understand all this English I'm speaking. But if I use pidgin, I can access the old woman, I can access the person who has been in the rural area, who has limited education. That is one advantage. And also it is our language and it is fluid. It encourages creativity. It is not so bound by rules and all of that. It allows you to be creative. All languages can do that, but when it comes to Nigerian pidgin, you see it full blown. And also Nigerian pidgin is widely spoken. For instance, in Nigeria, over 75 million people speak the language, and it also helps for cultural contact, like I've said already. If I come across an Igbo text, it gives me a better experience with the text if I have it in the language that I can access. And if, like what we've done, we have the stories in the indigenous languages, and then line by line, we have them in the pidgin English, in the pidgin, Nigerian pidgin rather. So if, for instance, it is easier for me to merge a word in the pidgin with one in the Igbo language, and it may make me want to learn one or two words from the Igbo language. So it encourages cultural contact in the virtual space. Uh, Next slide, please. So Nigerian pidgin has suffered some misunderstandings and stereotypes. Usually, Nigerian pidgin has no place in education, except for some places where some persons may want to mellow a little bit and try to get information across to people who understand the pidgin better than the English language. If you're in an educational setting, even though you're not in a formal setting like your classroom with your lecturers and all, among your friends, if you speak pidgin English, it may be forgivable, but in some settings, even if it is not so official, the pidgin English is seen as a tag of maybe inner
Were gathered on this project. We also used narrative survey research. From this point, I will hand over to my colleagues who is going to tell us about the method used in this project.
Thank you. Of a good note is to connect the previous presentation to ours. The essence of digital humanities is to create a digital edition of our indigenous languages, that text or images, as you can call it. So what we propose is the minimal computing with little or no technical skills in adopting such as the folklores into a digital form, has been demonstrated through creating a WordPress site. We're adopting TEI XML language. TEI is a text initiative encoding, right, which helps us not too technical. You, as a humanist, you can decide to begin to code your project, begin to work on your project into a digital form. But permit me to say that there are creative commons. There are principles you must follow. You don't just sit down on your own and begin to create a digital edition of any humanities data. So you follow some strict commons. So this has been developed over decades. It's a community of practice where experts in the computer science, in the humanities combine, work together to produce guidelines of such digital edition, either in music, images, or text. An example of such is the IIIF. The IIIF helps you to manage only images, but we concentrate on TEI, text encoding initiative, to work largely on text and as a way to connect few images to it. So its chief deliverable is set of guidelines which specify encoding methods. That's a community of practice, not necessarily what I want to do as against what is being done without necessarily reinventing the wheel. For this project, we're using some TEI guidelines, especially the P5 guideline of TEI. While we focus on semantic markup, that's our own essence of the humanities data. We want to map meanings of text, not just the literal sentence formation. We want to read places where the cultural took place or takes place regularly. We want to mark people, organization, titles, and so on. So it's kind of flexible to work with. And you could also use it for a display of textual content or to analyze. The essence comes in annotation. People from different anthropology, English, literature could now decide to work on the edition, the digital edition of such cultural heritage, which we'll call digital cultural heritage, as the case might be. Why do we need to merge XML? The next slide. The extensible markup language works as a way to mark your documents, and also by following set of principles. So you see the synergy of TEI and XML. That's already made principles that TEI leveraged on. It isn't tied to any particular system or interface. It's just a way to mark up your document. There are four major things you need to consider when you want to lay your hands on digitizing your text, as a minimal computing would call it. The first one is your declaration, just a line of code. What I'm trying to say is you don't need to be a technical expert in this kind of documentation, digitization, and preservation. It's a ready-made line of code. You just run the code, then you begin to work on your text. Since you have the data in standardized form, then you work, the first thing is the declaration as is shown on the screen. Then you have your elements. Elements are pieces of text that you describe as paragraph, title, names, and so on, just to make sure the format reads line by line the text you have at your disposal. So as a humanist, I know my text. then I need to leverage on how do I showcase it in a digital form, not too technical aspect. Then the second one is your attribute. Attribute gives a specific definition about a particular element. If you are given an element title, the attribute will not be the personal name or first name or middle name or last name, as the case might be. So kind of step-by-step definition, but which also gives us a way to describe the text. The last one is the comment. The comment section usually is for the programmer to actually see content that wouldn't be visible on the internet for people to see. This is the description. The next slide, for a demonstration. This is how the code works. Permit me to say it again. You don't need to be a technical expert to work on such. There are guidelines you just need to follow. Then you put in your text right from the declaration with the header, that's the top. Then you have your file description, you have your title statements. The one you have, the line you have on fainted line is a comment that will not be visible to the reader. Then your title name, maybe main title, and on and on and on. This is just an XML environment, which is made popular by a text editor called Oxygen. Then the next one also shows us the other way to describe the text. So this is the method we have attempted to use to preserve the cultural heritage of Ojude Oba. We find a way to see people in diaspora to actually connect with the festival without necessarily coming back home, or to have access to the festival anytime, any day. And this is an ongoing project, as I've said, and that would really help us to continue from there. My co-presenter.
Very much. Yes. The scene of the Ojude Oba Festival. You can see, and you can see the next slide. That's the Awujale with the former governor of Ogun State during the festival. The next slide. Now, our findings. Ojude Oba Festival was celebrated in order to reconnect all Ijebu sons and daughters, both local and in the diaspora, for socio-cultural identity and development of their society. The cultural festival helped Africans in the diaspora to reconnect with their roots and identity. Conclusion. It was further recommended that digital preservation and dissemination of valuable cultural festivals such as this that showcase the African culture, unity, and development be encouraged by the government. Preservation, creating a digital edition of both textual and images can be stored in a website for use and reuse. Dissemination, cultural festival should be made available on social media platform. Digital pedagogy. The data can be useful for teaching courses in cultural studies and oral history. Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time. I'd like to reassure all of you, we're going to have questions after that, even if I have to shorten only slightly bit the break, in the lunch break. Finally, we're going to have the second paper in our panel, which is in second order in the program. It's going to be the third order today. It's by Túbọ, who is the author of the Yoruba Names Database. That's how I've learned about your work, sir. And also, I think you've been a friend of IFRA for a while. Am I right? No. Well, I think it. Yeah, that's exactly. So I think the floor is yours. The presentation is being loaded as we speak. There you go.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I had a presentation, but don't worry if it doesn't work. We've been trying to set it up for a bit. My name is Túbọ, and my presentation is titled "The Web Potential for African Language Scholarship and Research." And what I want to speak to here is a series of examples of things that are possible, and from my own particular experience as a linguist who has also used technology as a way of solving problem or advancing scholarship. My project, as I mentioned, is titled yorubaname.com. If you have your phones, if you're able to access it, you can check it. It is a dictionary of Yoruba names, which is online. It's also an app, but it's peculiar in that it is not a book. Many of you might be familiar with the book by Professor Adeboye titled Multimedia A Dictionary of Yoruba Names. It was published in 2002 or thereabout, and it has thousands of names. But the project we have is online, and the main difference is first that it's accessible globally, and no matter where you are, you can type yorubaname.com and you can access it. Second is that you can add new names to it. So it's not totally finite like a book is, in which case to add new names to the dictionary published, you have to redo it for a new edition. Then we also have what we call geolocation, where we try to geotag all the names in the dictionary. So when you have a name that's peculiar to a part of Nigeria, you can say, well, this Yoruba name is likely an Ijebu name, this one is likely an Ijesha name, this one is likely an Oyo name, etc. Which no name dictionary I've seen has. And then there's a peculiar element of it, which is audio. And I will speak a bit about how we arrived at that as well. And we thought this was important because when you're telling somebody about your name, for those who speak Yoruba, one of the things you need to know is how the name is pronounced and how it's written. Yoruba is a tone language, so we use tone marks, diacritics to identify what vowel you're pronouncing. And if you write a name without it, it's unlikely that somebody who doesn't speak the language or who doesn't speak it well can understand the meaning of the name, if it's a name they haven't seen before. If it's a name they've seen before, they might say, well, this is Yetunde, of course. But if it's a name you haven't seen before, like Ariyehun, which is a name I discovered a couple of years ago, without tone marking, I had no idea what it was because I hadn't seen before. I hadn't seen the name before. I was like, is it Ariyehun or something else? And then when I knew it was Ariyehun, I still didn't know the meaning until I knew what Hun was, the Hun part of it meant, which is to celebrate, something like that in Ijebu, which is still the same root in Tung, Omotung, the child is worth celebrating. When I knew that Iye was mother and Ariyehun means someone who rejoices in the presence of mother. Same thing as Ariyayo, standard Yoruba. So being able to write names properly and being able to know how it's pronounced are very important elements in understanding the preservation of names. So when we are having a dictionary where we want to preserve names in Yoruba, we need to be able to identify all these elements and make sure they're appropriate and presented in this project so that people who want to use it can benefit. And the audience we had for the dictionary were not just Nigerian speakers, even though they were the primary audience, people who have Yoruba names and want to know the meaning, or people who have Yoruba names, know the meaning and want to preserve it for future generation. And those who are not Nigerians, but who meet Nigerians all the time and want to be able to tell the meaning of people's names without having to ask them directly. Or people who know Nigerians or who might meet Nigerians and want to know how to pronounce Nigerian names. Okay, thank you. When they want to. So when you go to a TV station in the US, if your name is Merkel, Angela Merkel, or Francois Hollande, or the new French president, Macron, exactly. You would assume that media people do their research before they come to the TV, and then they know how to pronounce the name already by the time you get there. Oh, Mr. Macron, how are you? Etc. For Nigerians or Yoruba speakers, for instance, and ambassador goes abroad, of course, most people, because the president, try to pronounce the name, but you might have a colleague, you might be an American living in America, and a colleague is coming or you're meeting a new person, and you know their name, but you don't know how to pronounce it, you can go to yorubaname.com. and learn how to pronounce it because the audio is there. I'll speak to how we created the audio itself. It was important for me to put that element there, again, for the reasons I mentioned. But I faced a particular challenge because the ambition for the Yoruba name is to document all the names in the language to make sure that any name you want to find in Yoruba, you can find it there. But that presented a problem if you want to put an audio, because then if you want to record each name individually, currently we have over 6,000 names, how would you record individual names without incurring a lot of costs? And so what I did was create what we call text-to-speech, which is a system of training the computer to recognize patterns in Yoruba language. And when you put a new name, the computer can automatically pronounce it by itself without having to have individuals pronounce it. So what I did was break Yoruba down into components, syllables. Yoruba is a tone language and syllable based. So there's kola. In kola, which is my name, you have 2 syllables. And ko, you have the la. If you can break down all the diphthongs in Yoruba down and record just those segments, you can then teach the computer that when you find a high tone following a high tone, you pronounce those high tones. When you find a low tone following a high tone, then that low tone is the falling tone. When you have a high tone following a low tone, that high tone is a rising tone. And when you can teach the computer all of that, the rest is easy. And then now when you put any new name, without having to do any more work, the computer already knows and can pronounce it using the recording, the speed recordings I already put. So these are just examples of work that shows me that there's potential for African language and documentation. What I had in this paper is just a way of explaining what brought me to this place, from just observing, being a normal scholar, a student here in the University of Ibadan a couple of years ago, to deciding that, well, more than just field work and research and analog research that most of my professors did, there are other ways in which we can bring technology to bear in the work we do. Yes, so this is a chart of, can you go back to the beginning? I'm just going to go through each of the slides and then I'll round up. Yes, next slide, please. Next. Yes, so when my first work in this regard was at the university, as I mentioned, my undergraduate thesis. Many of my mates were writing large tomes and hard copy project, and I decided I was going to do a dictionary of Yoruba names. And I went to my supervisor, Professor Evwodere at the time, who said it was fine with me doing a dictionary of Yoruba names, and it was going to be on a CD, and I was not going to have any printed material except the instruction of how to use the CD. And that was the beginning. At the time, I recorded all the 1,000 names I had in the dictionary at the time. And then eventually in 2015, I went to the web to do that. But there's a major difference between having a dictionary in a book and in a CD and a web dictionary. And next slide. I already broached it earlier. In a book, you can't edit on the fly. And on the web, you can, oh, this name, the meaning we put there is wrong, or there are more meanings we can add to it. You can just go there and do that immediately. You can crowdsource, which means that people who are adding the meaning to the names don't have to be resident in one place. I was in Lagos when I started the dictionary. Many of the volunteers who add names to it now live in different parts of the world. And they can just add a name to it. And of course, it's not automatic. It doesn't go live to the web. It goes through a process where anything that's been put in, we have to vet and edit and go through and be sure it's correct before we publish. But people putting the input there can be anywhere in the world. That you can have with a book. Global accessibility, portability, you can have it on an app on a phone. The audio element I've mentioned, and the improvements you can add much later. Next slide. So for African languages already under a threat of extinction, this is one way of trying to push back against what has been the issues facing African language and technology. Next slide. This is a chart of the languages used on the internet. You can see English takes off almost everything, even though English is spoken by 565 million people. Next is Chinese, which has 3.3% of the web, even though it's spoken by 509 million people. So you can see English disproportionately just takes over the chart. In this list, you can't find any African language there, unless you count Arabic as one, and it's not. And see how all these big languages already took all the major shares of the internet. Look at the next slide. Again, it shows the kind of disproportionate content that we have of languages on the internet. The next one as well. Swedish, Korean, Arabic, Swedish, and other. So African languages most likely fall under this order. And Nigeria that has about 520 languages or so. Think of Yoruba as just one slice. And there's so many other languages like that that don't have opportunities to be represented on the web. And so this is one of the things that pushed me there. Move to the next 2 slides. Move again, one more. There was a day I was looking through Siri on the iPhone, which is the artificial intelligence voice that speaks to you when you speak to it. Google has it as well. And I was looking at all the languages that exist with Siri. We have Hebrew, Italian, Norwegian, Japanese, Korean, etc. Next slide. And there's no African language there. But Swedish is there, Norwegian is there. Look at the population of those languages. Swedish has 10 million, Norwegian has about 5.2, Danish has 5.6. All of them have 23.8 million speakers. And Yoruba has over 30 million speakers, and Siri doesn't exist. Which also makes me ask the question, how do these tech people decide what languages they give preference to? It's not because of language population, obviously, because there are smaller languages that get preferences. Is it because the people who speak the languages haven't shown enough that they can use tech in these languages, or they want to use tech in these languages? So these efforts are efforts to just show that it is possible for tech to exist in this language, and there are many possibilities in which we can use it. We also created a tone marking software, which is free to download, where you can use to put tone marks on Yoruba expressions, and a number of other things like that. Could you move forward a little bit to the Yoruba? Yes, so this is what the dictionary looks like. You put the name, you press enter, you can check whatever name you want, you can find the latest searches, etc. Next, please. This is what the dashboard looks like. This is where people submit entries with their emails. This is what we see inside. Sometimes they put the meanings, sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they say they don't know, like in this one. And what we do when we accept it is we then edit it and add all the necessary geolocations and every other thing, and then just publish. Next, please. Okay, so this is also the dashboard. This is what I see as soon as I log in. Because I haven't spent a lot of time there these days, you see that unpublished names, we have about over 2,000 unpublished names that have been submitted that we still haven't worked on yet. The suggested names, and the names that have been published are there, etc. And then we have a feedback option where people can argue. People go to the name and say, oh no, the meaning you put there is wrong. This is the true meaning. Or they come and say, well, there's a story behind my name. My father went this is the story of my village, etc. We add that there. We are hoping to have video options as well, where people can actually sit down and tell their stories, and we can upload it there for others to benefit. So with this are just the 2 projects I want to illustrate here. But the most important thing I want to use to live with is that the web is a vast space that exists, not just for English, it shouldn't be. And that one of the threats we have against our languages and culture is not just us not speaking to our children, that's one way, but them not having enough opportunities to use it on the internet is a very big part. Internet is where most of us spend all our times these days. And if we can make the internet as friendly to as many African language expressions as possible, a dictionary, we're working on a monolingual dictionary of Yoruba as well, which would be a dictionary where when you look for the meaning, you get the meaning in Yoruba first before you get the meaning in English, which we haven't seen anywhere except for maybe 1 or 2 books that are published in the past. If we continue to do things like this and keeping the internet relevant to our language and culture, we can also go a long way to make sure that our languages are preserved, and that can be a way to complement all the work that people do on the field as well. So it's not just a either or situation where the web has come and all the old ways of doing things are done. We believe that what people do on the field is important, the writing and the research is important, but the web is also important as a way to complement what they're doing and also to enhance and make them available and accessible to people all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kola. Thank you, Kola, for your presentation paper. Now it's time for Q&As. Thank you for keeping the time, all of you. It's 12:15. What about I open the floor for 20 minutes? 20 minutes of short comments and questions, please. If you've got comments, to keep them short, okay?
Let me congratulate the presenters. And the first presenter, the people that talk about the language and the Niger pidgin. Well, when the other lady presented in Urobo language, we understand it better. So unfortunately that we couldn't get Igbo one. But I think there's a need to find a way of better exploring this Niger language, what they call it, this pidgin language, which is now becoming, I think it's becoming our national language now, so that digitizing it and then digitizing some of our heritage that have been the Viber one, the oral folklores that we are losing so much, in a higher rate. So we have to find a way of doing that and incorporating it as we are trying to do. So that would be a very good thing. For our brother, the Ojude, to me, I think, well, Ojude is a new phenomenon in Ijebu-Ode culture. But in your methods, you talk of data and written record. But did you actually take part in that festival to really know what exactly is done at that festival? Is it only just sitting down and whining and doing all these things? Is there this horse race there? Then can you compare it with the race horse in the north? Maybe that type of festival emanated from the northern region, so that you are looking at it, because it has gotten some Islamic connotation. Yes, my brother. In fact, immediately you talk about this Yoruba name, I went down straight to it. I saw yorubaname.com. Is that the one? Yes. I tried to look at my name, but my name is not there. My son name, and I've added it immediately. Because they said but I've added it. So it's a good thing, because we have to be documented. Because when you look at it these days, when I meet some people, I ask, what is your name? Is either tell me either James, John, or Suraju or something. We are losing our name, and our own name has meaning. My name is Ogunfolakanmi. That is the Ogun has touched me with wealth. So you see, look at my professor there, Olayiwola. You see that, Ola continue to Yiwola. So that's a good name. Yoruba we say, Ile lawo katu somo loruko. Before you give a child a name, you have to look at the antecedent. What is the history of that family? What is the tradition of the family? The trade of the family? But now we are losing them. And there are some basic languages or basic things that we need to. For instance, I'm sorry, my child was asking me, my mother told my child, let me say it in Yoruba, he said, Omi yakinwa. Omi yakin in Ife language is hot water. Then my daughter was asking, what is Omi yakin? So we need to document all this virtually, and let's document them virtually, so that people will know, people coming behind us will know actually what has been our culture and heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. I think it was a direct question to our second panelist. I think it was a direct question to you. I thought it was more a comment for you guys. Mine is not a question. Yeah, yours was a question. You okay with that?